This is the Course of Action podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, Good Pods, and your favorite platform worldwide. You can also stream new episodes on the Reeves Across America radio network every Monday at noon Eastern. Reeves Across America's mission is to remember the fallen, honor those who serve, and teach future generations the value of freedom. Hey guys, before we get this episode started, do me a favor. Go over to andrews-wilson.com and sign up for Brian and Jeff's newsletter and check out their store. Check out a bunch of other cool stuff. Andrews-wilson.com. All right, guys, welcome back to Course of Action. You know the two gentlemen on the screen here from their Tier 1, Sons of Valor, the Shepherd series, last year's book, The Sandbox, which was fantastic. And, of course, you're going to know them from this year's book, 4 Minutes, which was also an amazing book. It's Brian Anders and Jeff Wilson. Guys, how you doing?
Doing great, man. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Of course, yeah. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for the advanced copy of 4 Minutes. You teased me last year when we talked about the Sandbox, and you just said, yeah, what would you do if you only had 4 minutes? I don't know. I sure do want to know. So I put it on my calendar like in January, and I emailed your publicist, and I was like, I have to have these guys back on because I got to know about 4 Minutes before everybody. I need to know before everybody because they told me like last July, and I've been just waiting ever since, and it was totally worth the wait. I loved it. It was fantastic, and I got a lot of questions for you guys about how you came up with the idea. So first off, how did the idea of the 4 Minutes come to be?
You know, the thing is, and you're a writer, so you'll get this, right? Like all of our stuff comes from just that sort of basic what if question, right? And for Brian and I, we've always, with our backgrounds, we've always been very technologically curious, right? So in Sandbox, for example, with AI, the what if question was pretty easy and obvious. And our, sort of the canon of our work is all this special operations stuff. But what makes it even more interesting for us is to add that one speculative what if element. And that's what we tried to do in 4 minutes. And so when we approach these things that have sort of a sci-fi element or a speculative element, we want it to be as grounded as possible, right? So I love that other stuff, the wild, way out there universe building, but it's not really what we do. And so we try to take that one question, grounded what if sci-fi question, and add it to a special ops sort of story. And that's what we did here. So if time travel was possible, it would have so many rules, right? It would be so limited. It wouldn't just be the DeLorean where you can go back to the Wild West, right? It would be something more grounded. It would be nice, but let's be honest, that's probably, if it were possible, that's probably not how it's going to unfold. It would be a giant disappointment, right? It would be something like, and so we said, well, what if they could do time travel? What would that look like? What kind of rules would it be? And how would that affect the modern operator? And so in 4 minutes, what we came up with was the idea that DARPA has cracked time travel, but the limitations are you can only go a short distance into the future, not into the past, and you can only stay 4 minutes. So what would special operators do with that? And to us, the answer was obvious. They'd be so excited to say, hey, now we can take a glimpse, just a glimpse into the future, see what's going to happen, bring that information back, and in the present, try to stop the next 9/11, try to stop the terror attack, try to stop the kidnapping, whatever it is. And so you'd start off, you'd be so excited, but then of course the problems are always going to follow this solution. No great solution in military history was ever not fraught with its own complications and making things more difficult. So that's sort of the broad painting of where the idea was born, I guess.
So what did you do research wise? Because again, you said that you like to keep your stories very grounded, and this was a very grounded book. It felt like this wasn't too far from reality. It felt like 4 minutes seems realistic. It seems like they just cracked the code just enough to do it. How much research did you guys do?
And yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of times, I think when you read Scientific American or looking at blogs online, you'll find that some of these breakthroughs come from research in other areas. That's a lot of how science works. Is people are tinkering around with trying to solve problem ABC, and then oh, that's interesting. XYZ happens instead. A lot of our pharmaceuticals are that way. So
Yes.
what we imagine is that DARPA was working on trying to build a fusion reactor to provide free, sustainable, reliable power, a modular fusion reactor that they could use from base to base. And what happened is when they turned it on, and we kind of had fun with this. When they turned it on for the first time, it sent one of the cleaning techs into the future. He came back, and so that's they sort of we jokingly call him the father of time travel, and he's this guy who was just on the staff. So that was sort of the fun thing. The fun element is that it kind of happened by accident, and they quickly realized that there are, like Jeff was just saying in his previous discussion, there's a really tangible benefit, even if you're only limited to being able to stay for 4 minutes. When we talk about intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance at ISR, you know, think about 9/11, and so many people will say, well, all the signs were there. We should have seen this coming. That's the common refrain whenever there's a terrorist attack or an accident. We should have seen this coming.
Right.
The signs were there. Well, now, with the donut, which is what we affectionately call the device, you go get a glimpse, and you can see, you don't have to rely on just those signs to intuit what's going to happen. You can see, hey, this did happen, so now we're going to go back in the present and try to stop it.
Yeah, and then to sort of tie that to your question about research, we did do a lot of reading, and in fiction, you have the luxury of just latching onto the stuff you read that fits, right? And
Right.
so we did feel like there would be two main elements that are fairly grounded that we'd want to tie in. One is the idea of time travel itself and what that would look like, and so we leaned heavily into what's called the river theory of time and how time works from a physics standpoint, and you'll see that reflected in the novel. And then the real grounded thing for our nuclear engineer half of the writing team is the biggest limitation is always going to be power. Right? It's always going to be the energy and the energetics of how the system works. And so, in our fictitious world of time travel, that's the reason that they can only go so far. They can only go a few weeks into the future, and they can only stay a few minutes because they can only sustain this field for that period of time. And once it becomes unstable, then you need to come back. So those were sort of the things that we spent a little bit of time reading and educating ourselves on, looking at the math, making sure it was like, yeah, that doesn't sound too crazy. Like, I think I can, if I can buy it, then maybe the reader will buy it too. So
Oh yeah.
that was sort of how we tackled that.
So, how many discussions did you guys have about this concept? Because it seems very plausible, especially the way you guys do the math and you do the river theory. The way you explained that to me was like, I had to read it twice, but only because I couldn't believe like how much sense it made. It just it was too much for my little brain to comprehend. I was like, that made sense. Why? And I had to reread it. But how many discussions do you guys have on this? Because there's a lot of what if questions.
Yeah.
And Jeff, I got a medical question for you here in a little bit.
Okay.
But how much debate did you guys have on this? Because I could see there being a lot of debate on like, what if, would this actually happen? Is this really a limitation? Like going back and forth? Like how much of a debate was it on the
It
facts?
was less of a debate and more of a brainstorming style discussion. But I think the short answer is far more than probably was required because we tend to both be kind of geeks when it comes to stuff like this. So we wound up going in tangents that didn't even make it into the book. We had some of the most fun science and philosophy conversations maybe of our partnership
Oh yeah.
as we were hammering out this book. We spent hours and hours giggling and talking about how exciting some of this stuff was. So yeah, there was a lot of, and it wasn't just like up at the front, right? Right, Brian? Like periodically we went back to stuff. And, oh, what if we change this? What if we change that? But well, we got to go back and make sure that it makes sense. The biggest fear is you don't want some physicist to read the book because he's a thriller fan and go, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, right? Just like you don't want a Navy SEAL to read Tier 1 or a CIA operative to read the Clancy books, or an ONI person and go, oh, that's ridiculous. So there was that paranoia that led some of the discussions, but mostly was just us sort of geeking out and having fun, I think.
Well, I mean, to me, it felt like you guys knew what you're talking about. It felt like you knew something that we all didn't, and that you had talked to someone who had some background on this. Just because the plausibility of it, the actual reality of it, to me, as I was reading it, made it feel like, okay, these are the rules of the 4 minutes. You can go forward, and then you have to come back, but not everything comes back. I believe, like you guys said, if you get shot or if something happens in the future, it doesn't necessarily come back with you. And the more I thought about that, the more I was like, that could be the truth. I mean, because the future isn't written yet. So how can you pull something back?
If you think about the time, anybody who reads the book's going to get into the river of time theory. So we can just talk about for a second here it doesn't ruin anything in the story. It's just this idea that, imagine time as a river, and you're on a riverboat and you're flowing the current of time as you're moving with it. So if you jump off the front of the boat, you're in the future because you're approaching whatever's downriver, before the riverboat does. And if you come back to the boat, you're back in the present. And so that was sort of the idea, is like, imagine jumping off the front of the boat, and you can only propel yourself into the future as powerful as, your leg muscles. So that's sort of the idea with the machine, is it only has so much power, like Jeff was saying, and so it can only project you so far into the future before you get sucked back to the present. Then we got into this interesting scenario, and this I don't want to get too much in discussion because it would be a spoiler, but we get into this spooky time scenario, which is, well, what happens if you jump, to the point where now the riverboat catches up to you, time catches up when you come back. What happens to that period of time that would be lost, right? So if you're jumping very, very short into the future, less than 4 minutes in the future, which is the duration that you could stay, that gets really, really tricky. So when we talked about, you're like, how many discussions did you have? That was a big one. And we actually had to map it out on a piece of paper and talk, okay, so what happens if you stay 2 minutes, you're having a conversation with somebody and the time catches up? Did that conversation happen? Do people remember it? And so we drew that diagram, and you probably remember seeing it in the book. We drew that diagram, and we put it in the book because we knew that one is so complicated that people are going to spend it and be like, wait a minute, okay, go here.
No, I appreciated the
yeah. So that was the geekdom made it into the book with the diagram.
Yeah, as I was reading, I was like, is that diagram? I was like, wait a minute. That was actually really helpful. Yeah, I needed it because it made a lot of sense. And how did you guys how did you settle on 28 days being the maximum?
It worked for the story.
Beautiful.
Like that wasn't based on any deep dive into quantum mechanics. That was that fits the story well. But also, I think that not only did it fit our story, I do feel like when and if this were ever plausible, there would be, just based on, like we said before, the energy required, there would be some limitation similar to that. And maybe it wouldn't be how far, it probably would be how long. But, we knew there would be some rules that would be discovered. And that one definitely fit the narrative. If you could go a year into the future, well, it's a little less suspenseful, isn't it? Right. I got a whole year to figure this out and
cool.
Figure it, decide when and where and how. But if you only have a few weeks, man, that really puts the pressure on our operators to figure this out and stop it before it's too late.
Well, and if you can
part of the motivation for this story was like the television show 24. we really like this idea of the ticking clock and that you always are feeling this pressure, and like that was a television series and this is a novel. So we don't have the luxury of having the visuals, and being able to do these scene cuts and stuff like that. But what we do have is the ability to say, okay, most of our readers are going to get this concept of the ticking clock, right? And so now, the 28 days, that feels that doesn't feel like enough time to stop something big
Right.
and bad and terrible, right? And the fact that you only get 4 minutes to collect intelligence on whatever the event that is, that's also problematic too. So that was something else that we didn't set out with this idea of, having to use special recruited characters for this book. But the fact that you can only stay for 4 minutes sort of made us say, okay, well, what type of people would you actually need to send into the future? We write books about operators, but what other skills? And we're like, man, you sure want to have a good memory if you can only stay for 4 minutes because you'd want to remember as much as you could. And so
Yeah.
that's sort of the other element that we worked into there, is that every single one of these team members has some sort of eidetic memory. And that was really fun to play around with. They're not just photographic memories, because in real life, people have different types of memory skills. And so that was fun, is every team member has a different kind of eidetic memory.
I really liked the fact that each member was unique in their own right and brought something different to the table. Because again, with only having 40 minutes, you can only go a maximum of 28 days into the future, and the odds are very much against you. Again, you have to go, you have to get what you need, you have to come back. How did you guys settle on the fact that when the timer was up, it just automatically sucked you right back to the present without any initiation? Because in movies in Hollywood, you see them go, okay, guys, we got to go. And they, hit the button on their wrist or whatever. And then they all, as a team, go back. There's risks associated with that if you don't go back. How did you kind of come up to the idea that, when the timer's up, everybody just goes back, it's automatic?
Well, I think that it was sort of related to the premise of the limitation itself, right? If the limitation itself is the field is only going to remain stable for a set period of time, when that field begins to collapse, then the entire process just reverses itself. So it just sort of made sense to the universe that we'd created. If that's the way it worked, then it seemed logical to us that that's how it would happen. And it didn't really add much suspense to having to hit the button on your watch, or
Yeah.
power up the DeLorean and get to 88 miles an hour, because you already know what that time limitation is. And so you're going to be monitoring that time. It's not like you're going to be shocked when you get sucked back. You see in the book how he's counting down. Okay, we got 30 more seconds. We got 15 more seconds. So it didn't seem like it would add much to have them have to press a button or whatever. So I think it just fell naturally into the story.
Yeah, I liked the marker on the floor. They all had their own marker on the floor, and that seemed very important to get there, just because you had to see where you were going, and then it was kind of implied that you want to come back to your same spot, not
Right.
necessarily because there's going to be issues, but there was that kind of that sense of, I don't know, urgency or emergency about it. Like, your spot's there for a reason. You want to come back to it. Like, that's very important. There's a medical aspect to this, and I don't want to get too much into it because I don't want to spoil it. But Jeff, I do want to pick your brain about it just a little bit. How important was the effects of time travel to you as someone who spent time in combat, as a surgeon, as a medical professional? When did that twist get in there, and how important was it?
Yeah, you're talking about the biological effects. It's a little hard to dance around it without
Might
it
be a
being
bit of a
spoiler.
spoiler, but that's okay.
So I'll try to be vague, but I think that it's an application of the human toll of whatever, right? So we've spoken with you before about what that toll is on an operator, with the physical toll, the emotional toll, the toll on a family of sustained combat operations like what we experienced over the last 2 decades. It's a lot akin now to World War II. Not taking anything away from the Greatest Generation. The idea that you left and didn't come back for 2 years. That's insane to me. I still can't
Yeah.
even imagine. No phone calls, a letter once every other month.
Yeah, there's no internet.
Um,
There's none of
there's
that.
no internet, right? Exactly.
Not what we
But
had.
our generation's version of that is the toll of repeated deployment after deployment after deployment. Guys that have gone 9, 10 deployments. So there is a toll, right? There's a toll of this life that people choose. And so we wanted there to be a toll here as well, that this new tool that maybe prevents those 20-year wars, right? By stopping these attacks, it needs to have a toll as well. And so we explored what that could look like, and we wound up with something biological. And I will tell you, so I don't want to spoil it because it is a fun part of the story,
It
but I
is.
will tell you that what you read in the book, that is definitely based on real biology and, the biology of telomeres, the biology of aging and genetics, is reflected very accurately in this book. We did spend some, part of it is my background, but a lot of it was just research in how that works, and what research is ongoing even now, in terms of modulating the effects of telomere on cellular aging and that sort of thing. So what you read in that book is based on for real science.
That's what I was
We'll
wondering.
leave it at that. So I probably already ruined the story, but
No,
hopefully not too much.
no, it's an interesting piece of it. It definitely got me thinking. It keeps you thinking the whole time, like, how plausible is this? Oh my gosh, this feels real. And then that twist to it, it makes you go, well, I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that this whole time. I didn't think of that, but that is a real concern. Um, what do you guys think with the way the world's advancing? You played with AI a little bit in the Sandbox last year. The world's constantly advancing. Technology is constantly advancing. At what point do we say we're relying too much on technology for everything? From Congress just banned TikTok. So from our entertainment to our healthcare to military applications, at what point in time is there too much technology?
I mean, I think that that's a question that we're all going to be forced to reckon with. We're going to be forced to reckon with it on an individual level, but also as a society too, because we've always approached. I mean, I think as human beings, we approach our professional career and our personal life from this. It's programmed into us, this idea of survival of the fittest. It's a dogfight out there, and so everybody's always looking for advantage, to compete against our fellow human to get that promotion, or you want a potential partner or spouse that uh, is going to contribute to your life, that you can contribute to their life, and so you're always looking for what's the angle, what's the way that I can get myself to the next level. And what Jeff and I talk about is one of the ways that we personally have done in our careers is we work harder, we have a hard our work ethic, we study, we put in the time, we educate ourselves, and so work harder, faster, smarter. That's sort of the tools we've used to succeed in our careers. And now if somebody wants to augment themselves by saying, well, instead of me writing a book, I'm going to use ChatGPT to write a book, I put in a prompt and I say, write me a military thriller like Andrews and Wilson, and it's read all of our but it's also read all of Brad Thor's and Jack Carr's and
Mm-hmm.
Don Bentley's, and now it synthesizes and writes a book from a prompt, and it does it in 3 minutes. Can you say, did that person write the book? I think the answer is no. So at some point we have to say, well, it's not even just a question of fairness. Clearly, that's not fair to claim that you wrote a book because you put a prompt in ChatGPT, but it's also sort of a question of survival too, right? So now this tool, which is ChatGPT, is asymmetric warfare, right? It changes the entire ability for a person to compete as a human being, because now I'm augmented by a machine. But this is nothing new, and people have lost their jobs to bulldozers. They've lost their jobs, horse carriages have lost their jobs to cars, and so this idea that technology is going to augment and replace human capabilities has been around since the Industrial Revolution.
It's
But I
true.
think what's different now is that artificial intelligence is going to be able to outperform us on a mental and memory level, and we've never faced that before.
I mean, I think a more generic answer to the question that applies to the AI as well, but also to this idea in our novel and any technology. And it sounds a little simplistic, but I really think it's the heart of the matter. The line you don't want to cross is when the technology goes from being a tool to being something that you serve. Is the technology something that is serving you, or that you eventually are at risk of serving the technology? When it is taking away from the human experience instead of making your life better, that's the line. Now, that line is, you can have different opinions on where that line is for one thing,
Sure.
but you can also, I think that line is different for different forms of technology. When you talk about, AI and it writing music, writing books, creating poetry, those are expressions of the human condition that cannot be replaced from the human condition. Like, do you want to read a book about being a human written by someone who doesn't know?
Right.
Right. And so to me, that's the line. The line is, when does technology stop being a tool in my toolbox and start becoming something to which I am beholden? And you got to ask yourself that question about each individual technology, and we all have to ask it for ourselves. But eventually, like Brian said, it becomes something we as a culture, we as a society, we as a planet and a species, in terms of AI at least, need to make a decision about and
Yes.
be in agreement, because we can't wait until it's all done, because then it's too late. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. And the same would be true with technology like this. We have another project in the works about new weapon technology, another speculative thriller that we're working on, where we talk about trying to clean up the technology of warfare, sterilizing weapons of mass destruction so they're not so destructive. Is that a good idea? Like, when you start to remove the messiness of war, doesn't it make war less something to be avoided? And so I think that line is different for different technology, but it is the same line somewhere for each of those technologies.
And I
So the
think one other interesting consideration too is, if you've watched Oppenheimer, the timing of Oppenheimer's release is not coincidental. I think it's representative of the zeitgeist that, we're looking at nuclear weapons as, that what Oppenheimer, the subtext, and not even the subtext, but the entire message of Oppenheimer can be applied to artificial intelligence, right? So when he says, that he's created a weapon, when he's wrestling with the fact that he's created a weapon that could be used to destroy humanity, the safeguard is that, well, now it's up to us, the human beings,
Mhm.
to decide if this technology is used. And so you have some comfort in the idea that maybe cool heads will prevail, and we all have no we all have self interest in not destroying the entire planet. But with I like what Jeff said about the genie. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. What's interesting about AI is, as opposed to the nuclear weapon, AI, we don't have the ability at some point to control it. So now, if it decides to do something, it's like giving the nuclear bomb autonomy, right? No one in their right mind would say,
We
let's
trust
give
you.
every nuclear weapon the choice whether it wants to blow itself up or not, right? And so that's sort of where we're heading with artificial intelligence. And I think that's why there's a lot of fear, because, this might be the first technology that human beings have ever created where we don't have control over it.
Yeah, and Putin keeps saying in the news that, hey, remember, NATO, if you put boots on the ground in Ukraine, I'm going to use nuclear weapons. But again, that is a human logical choice that he has to make. He can say it as many times as he wants to, but until he tells whoever to press the button, or he hits the big red button, or to turn the double keys, or whatever their process is, that has to be done. That act has to be done. There's a lot of decisions involved in that. Even Putin, would like to think before he does that, is going to have some second thoughts. But AI doesn't have that, as you said, and I think that's a very valid point. And
Yeah, and
scary point.
those are the safeties we need, right? Like,
Hmm.
because I don't want anyone who's listening to this or who has read Sandbox to walk away thinking Andrews and Wilson are anti AI. We're not. We are pro controlling the technology and making sure it serves us and not the other way around. The benefits of artificial intelligence are not subject of debate. The impact it can have in military application and saving lives on the battlefield, the medical application alone is worth the exploration, right? I believe, as a former physician and surgeon, I can tell you that I believe strongly the cure, not the best management like what we're doing now, but the cure for cancer will come through a partnership between human beings and artificial intelligence. To be able to logarithmically um, enhance your ability to consume data is something we've tapped out. We've gotten as far as we can as human beings without augmenting it with something. And the idea that a surgeon could be in the operating room listening to the artificial intelligence going through every paper ever written on the unique problem that he just encountered in the operating room, that's going to save a human life. And so
Yeah.
we're not suggesting that that artificial intelligence should be banned. We're suggesting that we had better be proactive in approaching artificial intelligence with safeguards to ensure that we control it and not the other way around. So,
Right.
and the same argument, just like in the film Oppenheimer, needs to be made for each and every technology, because we live in a culture now, or in a society now, where technology is increasing at an ever expanding logarithmic rate. What used to take a century eventually took a decade and now can be done in months. And so we have got to be more forward thinking as a species for how we control these technological advances. And I think that's sort of the message from Andrews and Wilson, more than anti-technology. We're certainly not saying that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% with you guys. I think it dates back for years of what we've done in the military, and every advancement in technology. We've said, this is great, this is fantastic, this changes the game. And then we just totally don't think about the consequences. You
Of
know,
those changes, right?
when we had the Predator and the Reaper drones, we thought, this is a game changer. We can see eyes in the sky. We can see more things than we ever had before. We forgot that we were putting two guys in a Connex box in the middle of Nevada for hours on end, and making them watch things that humans shouldn't just sit there and watch for hours and hours and hours in these long shifts. And then now, these guys, I work with a guy now who was a former ISR guy, and he goes to counseling every single week, and we talk in my office all the time, and he says, I just saw things over and over and over again that no human should have to see, but that was my job. I'm like, well, the technology sounds fantastic, but what about the after effects and all the consequences? I think that's, with AI, it's a valuable tool. We use it at work. The Air Force has a approved AI that they have downloaded the Nipper network to, that it knows all these things. You can put a question in there. You can ask it to write an awards package based on these parameters, and it will do it for you. It's a fantastic tool to use at work. That's a good application. But there's other applications where that same program could go off the rails.
Yeah, don't get it up on Sipper. That's all I ask.
Right? Yeah, that was my thing. Like, that's pretty. I mean, Nipper's one thing, but because we got enough COA stuff on there as it is. But a little scary for me. But last question before I let you guys go on this one. What was your favorite part of writing this book?
For me, my favorite part was this idea that um, what we're doing, what we what we think we're doing in our little experiment. Are we first, or are other people doing it? So you always wonder, like when you come up with a new technology, like, are you the first one, and how long do we get to keep this secret? How long do we keep our asymmetric advantage? And so that was a thread that we pulled very gently through this novel. and we hope to be able to write more in the series, but it's
too.
kind of a fun teaser for future books. But you know that when you have a really cool technology, that somebody else is not far behind thinking of the same thing or trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, I like that, but I think for me, it's the same as what's true in every book we write. I love humanizing whatever the concept is, whatever the what if question is, whether it's technology or new war threat or whatever it is. I love the ability to humanize it, to put it into a character driven story that makes you see what that human effect is, be able to see it through the eyes of someone that becomes real to you on the page. That's what I hope we did in this one, with Tyler Brooks and the rest of his team, that you can see and even feel the experience through the eyes of characters that you relate to. So that was what was fun for me.
Yeah, I loved it, guys. It was fantastic. I was looking
Well,
forward
thanks,
to it
Jeff.
all fall ever since you told me about it. The Sandbox was fantastic, and I was like, man, if this is the direction these guys are going in, I'm all in. Count me in. And then you said at the very end of the interview, I don't know if you remember this, but very, very end of the interview, you're like, yeah, we'll have to come back in the spring, talk about 4 minutes. I was like, hold on. What? And I think Jeff, you told me just like a couple sentences
I
about it,
said,
and then
"What
you're like,
if?"
okay, we
Yeah,
gotta go. And I was
I
like,
do remember, Jeff. It was the perfect tease, especially for a guy like you who's into this stuff. I was like, "What if you could go just blah blah blah?" Yeah.
yeah. I went and told my wife,
All
I
right,
was like, you would
goodbye.
not
Talk to you in the
believe,
spring.
yeah, what these guys did to me at the last second. Told me about this 4 minutes. She's like, oh, that sounds interesting. When's it coming out? I was like, not till like next April. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for coming on. We'll break here. We're going to talk some Tom Clancy here in a minute.